Welcome to the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast, where we discuss topics related to sterile and non-sterile compounding pharmacy in an effort to promote compliance and increase quality. The Pharmacy Inspection Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, delivering quality and meaningful conversations and discussions about our pharmacy industry and the critical role pharmacists play in our healthcare systems. Learn more at pharmacypodcast.com. Please welcome your hosts, Brian Prince and Seth DePasquale.
This podcast is being brought to you by Encore Scientific. With over 70 years of combined experience, the Encore team is able to provide the highest quality chemicals, bases, equipment, and consulting services at the lowest possible cost to your pharmacy. Please visit them at encoresci.com. That's ENCORESCI.com, or by phone at 800-454-2304. and discover the benefits of a relationship with Encore Scientific. Once again, encoresci.com or call 800-454-2304. Mention this ad that you heard it on the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast and receive 20% off your next order. Hello, compounding pharmacy friends and colleagues. It's a new week and a new episode. Sorry for the episode hitting a little late last week. I've gotten much busier at the pharmacy, and traveling around the country last week really didn't help. But speaking of traveling, Brian and I went to the American College of Apothecaries in Florida, and we met a lot of great new contacts and just all-around good people. One of which was Denise Frank. Denise is a pharmacist with a lot of experience in regulatory and compliance, most notably helping launch the National Associations of Boards of Pharmacy program for inspecting compounding pharmacies. Lately, she's been doing more consulting work independently through Frank Consulting and also with Gates & Associates. To be honest, when Brian and I first heard Denise speak, asking a question during one of the panel discussions at the ACA conference, we were blown away by her knowledge and experience and just had to have her on the podcast. So without further ado, Denise, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is Denise Frank. I'm a pharmacist. I graduated from the University of Minnesota College of Pharmacy. Seems like 100 years ago, but it was actually 1985. So that gives you an idea of how long I've been in this business. My first job in a pharmacy as a technician was in 1977. So I've been compounding and playing around in pharmacies and the whole thing for, more than 40 years now. My first job out of school, I worked for retail pharmacy, and then I had my own pharmacy for many years in a small rural town in Minnesota. From there, I went to a health system, and I worked at putting in clinic pharmacies for them, in their clinic buildings, so an outpatient pharmacy in their clinic buildings. And then I worked for SuperValue as a pharmacy manager and then a district manager for many years. I was on the board of pharmacy for 8 years. In the 90s, and got involved with NABP, the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy. I worked on the MPJE review committee, and that's the law exam that you need to take when you become a pharmacist as part of the board exams. And so I worked on that committee for almost 17 years. And so I had exposure and worked with the laws in all of the states and in developing questions for the law exam and validating questions. And so I've been, my interest in the law has been there all along. So I had started working for NABP as a contract surveyor and inspector for them, and did that part-time for a lot of years. And then I became the accreditation and inspection services manager. So I was responsible for a team of surveyors and inspectors. And post-NECC, the big concentration of what we were doing was developing the VPP program, which inspected sterile and non-sterile compounding pharmacies. I also worked on their accreditation programs too, so all the accreditation programs, DME POS, VIPS and VET VIPS, which is no longer, but the VIPS is the Verified Internet Pharmacy. one. The VPP forms I helped develop, VOD, the wholesaler program as well. So my interest in regulatory compliance, has always been there. A couple years ago, I went independent, and now I'm working from the other side and helping pharmacies, identifying, what they need to do, doing a gap analysis for 795, 797, 800, or in general pharmacy. Are they compliant with HIPAA and non-discrimination, and are their HR files complete? Are they doing DEA inventories they should be? Do they have controls around security? All of those things in their processes. Are they, processing prescriptions accurately? Are they, what kind of steps do they have in their quality system, their quality assurance system, and quality improvement? So all of those things are going into what I'm doing now.
So that's awesome. That's an incredible background. You definitely seem like you've done it all. And we met Denise here at the American College of Apothecaries annual conference in Ponte Vedra, Florida, and she was standing up and she was asking questions of a panel. And I said, that sounds like an interesting person. We need to get her on the show. And obviously, we were right. You are a very interesting person. So we appreciate you joining us again. So of all the things that you do, the QA, the QC, the gap analysis, the education part, the accreditation, what of all those things is really your passion?
Oh my gosh. Most of the time in a pharmacy, they don't know what they don't know. And that's the biggest point. Pharmacies get in trouble because they didn't understand a regulation, or they're not conforming, and they don't even realize that they're not doing it up to the regulations or the accreditation standards or whatever. And so by far the gap analysis part of what I do is the most valuable, because I can go in and I can say, okay, here are the things you need to do for 795 for non-sterile compounding. And here are the things that you're not doing quite correctly, or you're not documenting correctly, or you're not doing at all. And so just the letting them know what it is that they don't know is more than half the battle. From there, pharmacies can develop their policies and procedures or change what they're doing so that they're doing it better. And a lot of times, they may be items that maybe the Board of Pharmacy, didn't clue in on because they were small items, but they're still part of that 795 or 797. And pharmacists by far want to do the right thing. They just don't always know what that is. And so I think that's the most important thing that I can do to bring to the profession to help improve patient care, is to identify those things.
So we talked a little bit at lunch, and we were just chatting about doing surveys and inspections for independently and with Gates. And I've asked this of a couple other surveyors, but what are maybe like the top 3 things that when you go into a compounding pharmacy or hospital, that you see wrong, that are quick and easy fixes that literally they could probably turn around and fix that thing in a day?
Oh, well, it may not be a easy fix depending, but in sterile compounding pharmacies, by far the one thing that is done wrong, and I've not found it done correctly and completely in any pharmacy, is the certification. When you have that semi-annual certification of your rooms and your hoods, there are certain standards that needs to happen, and they don't. Either the certification company isn't doing the right tests, or they're not doing correctly, or they're not documenting them correctly, or they're not including things in the report that they should. It's all over the board. Certifiers, you hire a certifier as a pharmacist. You're going to hire a certifier thinking that they know what they're doing and they know exactly what to do, and they're going to do it all correctly. I mean, you're putting your trust in them. And so you don't take the time to understand what the tests are that they need to do, how they need to be performed, and with what equipment, and what that report needs to look like. What needs to be on that report. What kind of calculations need to be shown. What other data do you need? You need information on the equipment that they used. You need model numbers, serial numbers, and calibration dates of that equipment. When they're doing the viable testing, you need to make sure they've got positive and negative control information in there. If they're doing dynamic testing, and a lot of the tests are required to be done under dynamic conditions. Dynamic conditions means with the most people that would ever be in there doing the most complicated things there are. And you need to document what that is. If you do your certification report and you only have one person in there doing compounding, you can't then have two people in there compounding every day because you've not tested it for two people every day. So you need to have the most people in there doing the most things, and you need to have detailed records. Either the certifier needs to write it down or you do when they're there. Who was in there? What were they doing? How many were in there? During what test? That's so important.
Yeah, and would you say that also the application of what equipment that is actually running, equipment that is being used? In our earlier conversation, you mentioned, actually opening the refrigerator, just real, true dynamic conditions. And I've never really heard that component, because you really bring a different perspective for me to understand what is meant by dynamic. Because my understanding that some certifiers will use themselves as the dynamic condition in the room. But after I brought that to your attention, it's like, no, it's not really truly a dynamic condition.
We have to think back as to why are we doing this certification report? What's the purpose? The purpose is to see if your room can maintain the control, maintain the ISO conditions, maintain the sterile conditions as much as you can, with the most stuff happening. But that includes if you do have a refrigerator, and that's a really good one because it's not being done. Say you have a refrigerator in your anteroom, which is fine. You can have it in your anteroom. Typically, it needs to be in front of an air exhaust so that any particles that are generated leave right away. They're not sucked into your hoods, which is a bad thing. So, but you need to do all of your dynamic testing while it's running. That means you prop the door open until the compressor kicks in, because that's when you're going to generate particles. You want to know how many particles that's generating, and if that exceeds what the ISO room requirements are. And you can't do that unless it's running. If you have a printer in there, again, it's okay, not a good idea because it does generate particles, but you need to do the testing while the printer is actually printing, or it's not doing you any good. I mean, anything could be stable without running, but you want to test it when it's actually running, that the conditions are kept the way they need to be. And it's a tough thing sometimes, and you need to document it. Where pharmacists, we're pretty good about doing the right thing, but we're really bad about documenting what we do or putting policies and procedures around it, and that's a big thing.
When you go in and survey somebody and you see that the report is really deficient in some of these things, and it's probably not your job necessarily to consult with them at that point. You're maybe just observing, but if you were able to kind of give advice on maybe given these are some qualifying questions that I might ask of a certifier to see if they're maybe the right fit for me and see if they actually know what they're talking about. What would those sort of questions be, you think?
Well, so what happens when I'm doing a gap analysis for a sterile compounding pharmacy, we get to the certification part, is I have them pull out the report. And then instead of looking for the answers myself, I ask them the question and make them go through the report and find the answer. And if it's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. And then we have the discussion about why that answer isn't there, or why that test wasn't run, or why it wasn't run correctly. And okay, it says dynamic. Who was in the room at that time? Do you know? Were you here when they did that? And oftentimes they say, well, no, the certifier comes and we all leave. Well, that's not okay. Think back. Why are we doing this? We want to test to make sure conditions stay in control while we're working in there. And so if you don't have people working in there, it's invalid.
So we also talked a little bit about you being involved in education of developing programs for technicians and maybe developing some other programs here in the future for sterile compounding. What kind of programs would you recommend to maybe just a technician that wants to go work in a hospital? What are some things that they really need to kind of hone in on that you feel like when you go into a hospital, these techs are a little deficient in?
Well, that's all over the board because it really depends on the state. Technicians are gaining increasing roles and increasing responsibilities in pharmacies. As pharmacy advances and pharmacists advance in their practice, the technicians need to advance along with them. And so you do need appropriately trained technicians in order to get sort of a level playing field of a basic level of education. A lot of states now are requiring technicians to attend or successfully complete a technician training program. And the most often cited is that it's a program that is ASHP, ACPE accredited. Because then there's certain standards that include everything from all of the topics that you need to cover in the curriculum to how it's done, how much time. There's a simulation component, there's an experiential component. And so you know that if your technicians have gone through an ACPE, ASHP accredited program, that they're coming out with that base knowledge. Now, they've just put out some new standards, some proposed standards that are out for comment. The comment, I believe, is due by March 23rd. That separates out a basic technician or basic level technician and an advanced technician. And so they're taking some of those roles like sterile compounding or some of the more higher technology and higher knowledge roles and separating them out into an advanced technician education component. And so it's very interesting, and it's where we really need to go. But you need to know what your state requires as far as technician training, if they need to be certified or not. There's 2 national certification tests out there, PTCB and ACCEPT, and they're a little bit different in their focus. And so the hospital ones would recommend going through the PTCB. It has more emphasis on more hospital or institutional pharmacy and calculations, and sterile compounding is a component of that too. So you just I can't say enough about having qualified and experienced technicians, because they will make your job as a pharmacist so much easier.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So much easier.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that one of the recurring themes that we've had over and over, week after week, maybe not every single week, but a lot of the weeks, is the need for education. And so earlier when we were sitting in the panel discussion here at the ACA at their annual conference, there was, of course, deficiencies in education, and that. And the conversation revolved more around the actual pharmacy students coming out of college, but I think we've identified that at a lot of different levels, including the technicians, because think about it, those are the folks that are knee deep in the powder, they're knee deep in the process, they're in the sterile rooms, and just to me, it's like if you're going to let somebody go into a critical environment, and maybe we don't always call our clean rooms critical environments, but to a certain degree, that's maybe my old school terminology. That they have got to have at least shown some proficiency. It's been documented, and to be trained in those very important things that we're allowing them to do. So it's education to me is always at the core of what some of our solutions are in this industry. Would you agree or disagree that education is going to continue to be more of an important role in our industry?
Absolutely. And there's, a pharmacist too. There's just because you graduate from pharmacy school and have a degree does not mean you have the specialized knowledge to practice in all areas. You've got the base knowledge, and you're legally, with your license, you can do these things, but we really need to, as a profession, spend more time getting that specialized knowledge. One of the things that was brought up earlier at the panel discussion was any kind of education around veterinary compounding or veterinary medicine. It is a huge problem because pharmacists don't understand, or they're not taught about all of the other things that can happen with veterinary drugs. If they're filling products for animals, not only do you need to document exactly what the animal is this a pet or is this a food producing animal, because there are different regulations around food producing animals, and so you need to know what those are. How are you doing a DUR, drug utilization review? If you're relying on your computer, that's not happening because there are no veterinary drug databases that will interact with a regular pharmacy processing computer, and so it needs to be done manually. Do you have the references to do that? If you're even something as simple as documenting the pet. So you have a dog in there, Fido Johnson. And so I pull up a profile and I say, okay, what kind of dog is this? Well, I don't know. How big is this dog? Do we know what the breed is? I mean, a Chihuahua versus a Saint Bernard? Do you think there might be a difference in what dosage of a particular medication? How are you evaluating that dosage if you don't even know how big the dog is? I mean, so we're not doing a real good job with that, and we need to do better. If you're working with performance animals, your race horses, racing dogs, other performance animals, like human athletes, there are certain drugs you can and can't use. Do you have a reference that has all that information in it where you can look it up if you are treating those sorts of animals? So there's a whole other area there that a lot of our pharmacy schools just aren't covering. And again, you don't know what you don't know.
It's funny. That is probably that's the motto of this show. We don't know what we don't know. And it's funny when you said that the first time this afternoon. Seth and I, we look at each other and we just kind of giggle because that's our most favorite saying, which is really at the core of why we wanted to do this podcast is to share, because there's so many wonderful people out there in our industry, like yourself and all the guests we've had in previous weeks, that have so much knowledge to share, and we want this to be a real open source forum to say, let's get the knowledge out there, because I want us to share and not live in silos, right? We're all one big happy family, so let's at least share the information so that we have the common goal of quality and safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome.
And I know this is a crazy thing to kind of just pull you off in the corner and record this, but this has been a great conversation. We had a great conversation earlier. I wish we recorded some of that too, but we really appreciate it, Denise. Thank you so much.
We'll have more conversations in the future.
We look forward to it. Thank you, Denise. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
As you can certainly tell, Miss Denise Frank is an incredible industry resource and a wealth of knowledge. There's definitely going to be another podcast episode with her, and hopefully in the near future, and so stay tuned for that. And now a special thanks is extended from Seth and I to Encore Scientific for sponsoring the podcast series that was recorded at the ACA's annual conference. Encore Scientific is a manufacturer and distributor of high-quality, compendial-grade raw ingredients, buffers, solutions, lab equipment, lab supplies, and ready-made topical bases to lots of industries that include the pharmacy, cannabis, R&D lab, nutraceutical, and personal care markets. Discover how a relationship with Encore Scientific can make your life and company more successful and less stressful by visiting EncoreSci.com. That's EncoreSci.com, or calling them direct at 1-800-454-2304. And as well, I'd like to extend a special thanks out to you, to all of our listeners who join us week after week. Thank you so much. And until next week, keep raising the bar.